In this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 strategies that I use when I have to make a tough decision. So if, like me, you're an entrepreneur at whatever stage you are starting, you are scaling, perhaps you're exiting, I'm sure that on a very daily basis, you have to make decisions which are really quite difficult and would be considered tough, meaning you're not sure what to do and actually how to dissect the problem in order for you to make the very best decision. And the reason why that's important, without stating the obvious, is because as an entrepreneur, we make, I'm sure, 100 micro decisions a day, some that we're not even aware of, but the ones that we are aware of, the ones that we know will have a huge impact on our business, can be really, really tough to think through. But don't fear, I am going to give you 5 science-backed ways that you can make a tough decision. And these are some of the ways that I have employed in my entrepreneurial career to get me through some of these tough decision-making processes. So strategy number 1 is to gather as much data as possible. A study by the University of Cambridge has shown that companies, and I'm sure individuals who use data-driven decision-making, have a much higher chance of success and financial performance. So do take the time to gather the necessary information you need, which will help you to get as much perspective as you can on the problem that you're trying to solve. As an example, we as an organization at Ultra Education have always wanted to crowdfund. Personally, I've always wanted to use the mechanism of crowdfunding to raise money for some of our projects and programs. And I've been thinking about this for years, probably since about 2017. But it took me a few years of thinking and pulling together the data by which I could decide on whether or not we would have a good chance at succeeding in executing on a crowdfunding campaign. So what are the things that I considered? So I knew in order to have a successful crowdfunding campaign that you either had to go to lots of people in the crowd, or you had to go to a number of strategic partners who make up the crowd. So I then had to figure out, if I had to go to lots of people, did we have the capacity and resources to reach hundreds, potentially thousands of individuals? Or would we have a better chance at using the limited capacity that we had, but to leverage the relationships which we'd built up over time to come up with a smaller number of strategic partners? So we went with the latter. We had built up a number of relationships over time. So we thought if we were to raise, say, £50,000 on a crowdfunding campaign, that we'd have a better chance at approaching 10 or 20 big and small corporates to reach that milestone. Other elements of data that we pulled into what makes a successful crowdfund was that the velocity of the crowdfund was really important, meaning if the crowdfund out of the gate, I'm talking day 1 to day 3, hit 50%, then you are much more likely to close the crowdfund because people can see really early traction, looks exciting, and then the rest of the crowd follows. We also knew that you had to keep that momentum up. So great, you've come out strong out the gate, but what happens in day 7, day 14, day 20, if the crowdfund starts to slow down? Do you have a strategic partner or funder in place that can help you to give it some more momentum? And then lastly, we had to have a really compelling case. We couldn't just go to market with something which was wishy-washy. We had to be able to articulate our need to raise money from the crowd in a way that would really move people to action. And then lastly, we had to think about how much time we needed to prepare the crowdfund and whether or not during that period of the campaign, which would be about 30 days, could we have all hands to the pump given all of the other projects that we had at hand? So in pulling all of that data together, September of 2022, we launched our crowdfunding campaign, and we had spent 3 months preparing for it, knowing that within 30 days, we would raise the money based on a strategy which said that we would get to 50% within the first day. So we'd lined up some of our corporate partners to hit 50% within the first day. And then we knew that that would trigger a match funding from one of our bigger corporate partners, and that we could go to market to the wider crowd with a really good story that would compel them to get behind us because we had some traction. And so by day 14, we'd actually hit the target of our crowdfunding campaign, and then we could spend the last 2 weeks overfunding. So getting all of that data in beforehand and taking much longer than it should have done, a number of years, to really think about this and then make a decision on how we're going to do it, and actually use the resources that we had to hand and strategically putting it all in place into a plan enabled us to execute our first successful crowdfunding campaign after many years of consideration. But for us as a small organization, that was a tough decision because we would have to put a lot of resource behind something that may or may not work. So we used data to find a strategy that essentially determined a successful outcome. Strategy number 2 is to seek out diverse perspectives. Now, according to a study by Harvard Business Review, diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time. That's 87% of the time. So it's a pretty compelling argument to pull in different ways of thinking into a decision-making process, because you're much more likely to be able to make the right decision based on the information you've got. So what's my experience of that? And just recently, I'm talking within the last few months, we were approached by a partner who wanted us to do some work. And they gave us a proposal to respond to. And to be honest with you, we weren't sure where this was going. We weren't sure actually how we could respond to this proposal based on the work that we did. Now, initially, there was 2 individuals looking at this proposal and meeting with a potential partner. Then we brought in a 3rd set of eyes. And that 3rd set of eyes, after digesting the information in the proposal, listening to the client, picked up on 2 or 3 keywords that the client used, which enabled us, me particularly, to have a light bulb moment on what the client actually wanted. Because essentially what this client was asking for wasn't something that was business as usual for us. This was something which was quite different, but the client had seen that we had a particular insight into the audience that we serve, so young entrepreneurs, and wanted us to use that insight in a way that we normally wouldn't, but would satisfy the outcomes for a project, really big project, which they wanted to embark upon. Now, not only did that 3rd perspective give me the clarity that I needed to write what was then a winning proposal, but it also enabled us to see the value in the work that we did differently, so that actually we could then take this approach and use it to win other types of business. And since that point, I've been talking in the round vaguely about this project that we're running, and it sparked the interest of other partners who we're in conversation with about further pieces of work. So fingers crossed for us. But essentially, in this instance, we didn't know how to decide on the approach that we would need to take in order to respond to this client's proposal. But bringing in a 3rd individual with another set of eyes who thought very differently to the first 2 enabled us to open up a new way for us to do business. The 3rd strategy that I use is to test my assumptions. Now, according to a study from the University of Warwick, they found that individuals who challenge their assumptions and engage in reflective thinking are more likely to make sound decisions. So how has this played out in the way that I've made decisions? Now, when I first started the organization, it was with the ambition of teaching entrepreneurship to children, because I thought, or I assumed, that that would help to build a mindset and a skill set and confidence and esteem and communication skills and a whole bunch of soft and hard skills which would accelerate their development as young people. But all of that was an assumption, and I knew it was an assumption because there was no proof that the approach that I would take would yield results. So I approached it a bit like that, and on Twitter I hear entrepreneurs and investors rightfully suggesting that entrepreneurial ideas should be seen as experiments until you have proven outputs, outcomes, and revenue. So I almost started the organization with the assumption that I could be wrong. But really the more important thing for me is what could I learn, and therefore what should I be testing in order to take this assumption and see what I could do with it in commercial terms. So we did that. So we ran workshops, we ran programs, we ran events. It was all to build data, albeit qualitative data, to then determine whether or not this assumption, this idea that entrepreneurship for children could be a worthwhile exercise would then remain true. And the reason why this was a tough decision for me is because I was doing something that I had no evidence of. and I was completely pivoting away from the way in which I was making money and the businesses that I was doing. It was something that I had no previous experience of, any insight into. I hadn't run an education business, I hadn't run a youth business, but I was trying to put the two together. The only strength that I had was the entrepreneurship piece, and that seemed to play out well. The assumptions that we made, which were correct, which was that yes, entrepreneurial education at a young age does have an impact. The bit that we got wrong was that we didn't realize, or I didn't realize, that entrepreneurial education would also have social impact. I just thought it was great for educational outcomes. I didn't realize that it could have social impact type outcomes, which meant that we had to pivot the business, which was great because it opened up a whole new world of opportunity for us. The fourth strategy that I take is to take breaks. And yeah, I know anyone who's watching this who knows me is thinking, you don't take breaks, but actually I do. I just take micro breaks. And so research from the University of Surrey has found that taking breaks improves decision-making by reducing stress and increasing focus. So I'm here at Take Your Shot Studios based in Wembley Park. And in the studios, we have what we call a recharge area where there are beanbags, there's some fake grass, and some nice tinting to the windows where you can go in and detox. And those of you who know me will know that I absolutely major on power naps. In fact, when I used to work in the city and I would get the train in to Canary Wharf, and it was, shockingly early, 6 a.m. Or even 7, and the trains were full of people, so you could only stand up. And I'm sure Londoners who have to get up very early and are on a packed tube will resonate with this, that I learned the skill of being able to sleep standing up. But that being said, on a regular basis, I'll go and take a power nap, and that could be anything from 5 minutes to 20 minutes in our recharge studio at Take Your Shot Studios. Sometimes before I take a meeting, sometimes before I need to do a new piece of work, or sometimes when I'm just feeling burnt out, my mind's just been racing for the morning or the afternoon, and I find that it helps me massively. So I found that going to the gym is another thing that really helps me to disconnect from the work. And so it's one of the reasons why I go religiously, because it gives me separation. I don't have to think about anything. There isn't a mental exercise I'm doing physical exercise. So it's completely cutting off the need for me to use my brain, which gives it some rest. But what I found in putting that idea aside, putting that issue aside, and giving it time to rest, giving it space to breathe, that it helps me to form a new perspective, which improves my ability to make a decent decision on that topic. I've also realized that if an email comes through or I've got to make a decision on something, whether or not I need to make that decision there and then. So I've become very good at sleeping on an issue, not responding to email straight away, and determining whether or not it is a today problem, whether or not I need to figure this out today. And it's something that I talk to the team about when we are working through projects and programs and new ideas and initiatives. And sometimes if we are considering a problem that is a little bit further down the line, I always say, well, look, is that a today problem? Is that something we need to figure out here and now? Or can we sleep on it, get some more information, and then revisit that problem further down the line? Essentially, take a break from it. Let's not think about it or worry about it now. Let's do something else, because we need time to collect our thoughts on that particular problem and revisit it afresh. So I found that stepping away from a problem is something that really works for me, and I actively use it as a strategy in helping me make a tough decision. And finally, the fifth strategy that I use in making tough decisions is trusting my gut. And so a study from the University of Leeds has found that trusting your intuition leads to better decision making. So if you've gathered all the data, you've looked for diverse perspectives, you've tested your assumptions, you've taken breaks, and none of that works, trust your gut and make the decision that feels right. So trusting my gut is something that's just a part of the way in which I make decisions, and it's just a part of who I am today because I've just done it so much. But it came from an experience that I had early on in my entrepreneurial career, when it was the first time that I had to raise a significant amount of money to get a business off the ground. And I remember sitting with a mentor, talking this over, and it was a risk. Me taking this money, it was part grant, part loan, was a risk because, again, it was a startup, something we hadn't done before at this scale, and it was something that I was just really unsure about. And I remember this mentor saying to me, look, we've crunched the numbers, we've looked at the plan, but ultimately, Julian, unless you believe that you are capable of executing the plan, then you shouldn't raise the money. And it was at that point that I had to gut check the decision. And I realized at that moment that I was capable of delivering on the plan that looks easy. But if you follow the plan, you'll succeed. It looks really simple on paper, but he was saying, look, the paper doesn't matter. Do you think you can do it? Do you think you have the capability, not just the belief, but do you have the capability, the skills and the experience to do it? And I hadn't had the experience of doing the business in that particular way, but delivering the service, yes, I did have the experience. And this was when we started our digital marketing agency back in 2006. So we've been doing it part-time, evenings and weekends alongside our day jobs. So we knew that we could deliver the service, but I wasn't sure if I could wrap it around the structure of a new business. And that was the bit that I knew I could learn. I knew that I could learn the mechanics of a business, the dynamics of it, being able to deliver on that service. We'd already been doing it, we really enjoyed it, and we could do it well. And so I knew I had the capability to do the actual delivery piece, and so we went with it. And that became the first successful business that I ran at scale, and we learned loads from it, and the lessons taken are still lessons that I reflect on today. So that's it, guys. 5 science-based strategies that I've used in my life to make tough decisions during my entrepreneurial career. If you think I've missed out on anything essential, or if you have a favorite strategy that you use to make tough decisions, do let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I will catch you on the next video. See you then. Ultra and out.